Good morning and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Today's service will be about humanism and its relation to Unitarian Universalism. I'm Pete Wernick, and I'm joined today by my fellow service associates, Haley Anderson and Paul Brinteson, and our tech ushers, Deborah Mensch and Bill Beachley, who will help things run very smoothly. Tad Koryev and Emily Jaworski will contribute music by way of recording. Rejoining us next week, newly married. Our minister, Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry, will be here briefly today and back to lead next week's service. And the most important people to mention are you, the wonderful people of this fellowship, for you are the reason we do it. I invite you to shift into gallery view and scroll through the screens to experience the lovely diversity of people who have guided us through our history and are building our congregation's future, tuning in from a variety of locations and adding up to a fellowship that means a lot to us, especially in these troubled times. You are welcome here today. In all the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes that come together in your uniqueness, we are glad you're here. However you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty of whom you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In whatever way you make your living and wherever you're from, you're welcome here. Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, humanist, Jew, mystic, Unitarian Universalist, pagan, etc. With all of the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here today. No matter how long you've been away or how soon you will return, you are welcome here. Whether you're here with laughter in your heart or tears, you are welcome here. We invite you to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today.
If you're new here, we're glad you're here and hope that even on Zoom, you can still experience some of the warmth and love of this fellowship. Each Sunday is different here, so please come back a few times to really get to know us. Please see the chat window for the link to our first-time visitors page. That page has a link to our visitor info form where you can tell us about yourself and request info from us. Or email your contact info to our office manager, Carol, at officemanager@bvuuf.org. Carol's address is in the chat window as well. Our fellowship calendar and Connections Weekly list many opportunities to stay connected. Finally, if you're new to us, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat window. We love to know who is among us. 5 minutes after the service, we invite you to join a talkback to interact with Pete, Paul, and myself concerning any questions or thoughts you have on today's service topic. The link for that will be in the chat following the service. Next Sunday, September 13th, we will be changing to a new Zoom link for Sunday services. Please take note, the link you used today will not work next week. The new link for services is going into the chat now, and it will also be in the next Connections Weekly and on our website. So if you have the old link stored anywhere, please replace it with the new one. This is to improve our security against Zoom bombers in these strange times.
And I realized I skipped over something, so that would be a song by me that we'll do right after the chalice. I'm telling that to the tech people. Sorry about missing my cue there. Anyway, it's time to light our chalice. So if you have a chalice at home, you can light it as I light my chalice. So we know where all our chalices are. Please write in the chat, chalice lit in the name of your town. So please say the words along with me as I light my chalice. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. And now, some music. there a heaven in the sky? We'll understand it better by and by. For all that I know, the place I'm gonna go is 6 feet under, down below. I'd like to go on living after I die, and I've always wanted to fly. But just in case I don't get angel wings, I'm gonna concentrate on earthly things. For a long time now it's understood, heaven's your reward for being good. Remember that the man is watching from above, so you'd better be for peace and love. But I'm for peace and love anyway. I try to do a golden deed each day. I do it just because I believe that I should. That's my reward for being good. I do it just because it makes me feel good, and that's my reward for being good. That's my I statement about my thoughts about heaven. In the spirit of humanism, you might say. We will be speaking with you today about humanism, including the sometimes puzzling question, what exactly is humanism? Humanism is listed among the sources of UUism, but unlike many of the religions found among sources like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, etc., which are all ancient, a specific and organized religious approach named humanism was only conceived of and the term adopted about 100 years ago, around 1920. Forerunners go back to the ancient Greeks through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, when typical deity-centered worldviews were periodically challenged by those focusing on humans and their ability to reason, not just respond to gods, and on this life, not a possible afterlife, and those worldviews were sometimes called humanism. That term struck John Dietrich, a popular and vocal Unitarian minister in Minneapolis, as the right label for what he called a new religion without God. That first gained attention around the early 20th century, propelled by Dietrich and other Unitarian ministers from the Midwest, including Charles Francis Potter and Curtis Reese, with adherents including famous people like John Dewey and Albert Einstein. The new religion posited no object of worship or supreme being, no afterlife, angels, anything supernatural would be excluded, but there would be community, rituals, singing, and other activities associated with religion. These founders were, after all, Unitarian ministers. In 1933 came the first Humanist Manifesto, signed by 34 prominent people. And in 1941, the AHA, the American Humanist Associations, still going strong today, came along. So while it can be said that humanist thought is a source for UUism, I see humanism rather as having sprung from Unitarianism, similar to UUism in most of its ideals, with the one most distinctive philosophical aspect, the omission of the supernatural. Or in the most concise working definition I've found of humanism, being a good person without the supernatural. or if the elevator is very short, then good without God. There's more than one way to omit the supernatural. It can be emphatically kicked out the door, as atheist groups do, or it can be simply omitted. Individual humanists might find different places on that continuum. As one example, Simon Pierre Laplace, when asked by Napoleon why his theory of the universe didn't mention God, Laplace answered, "I have no need for that hypothesis." In the defining document, humanist organizations, no supernatural is clearly specified, but nothing in the UU seven principles even brings up the subject. Our seventh UU principle is about the interdependent web of life, and there's no mention of a being who created or oversees that web. What we do have is the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Is or isn't there a God? A UU might say, "What do you think?" Or, more pertinent maybe, "What do you mean by God?" Let's say while UUs are not necessarily humanists, it's quite easy for a humanist to be a UU.
Thanks, Pete. It was a routine, normal bike ride in July of 2014. About 15 club members were midway through our 30-mile bike ride when one of our bikers came alongside of me and in his British accent said, "I've read your book." And then after a pause, he said, "You're a humanist just like me." Then he picked up his pace, passed me, and was out of visiting range. And for the rest of the ride, I pondered that statement, "You're a humanist." Now that was especially significant since a week before, I had received an email from a high school classmate who, after reading my new book, made basically the same observation. Am I a humanist? Well, I was born into an evangelical, conservative Christian home where my father was a Pentecostal pastor. I never associated myself with humanism. In fact, I ran from it. Tim LaHaye, evangelical Christian author of the Left Behind books that sold over 80 million copies, proclaimed, quote, "Humanists are the mortal enemy of all pro-moral Americans and the most serious threat to our nation in its entire history," end quote. So, in just 2 weeks, 2 individuals who had read my book implied I was a humanist, and I thought, I can't be one of them. The book they were referring to that I had written in 2013 was The Bible Reconsidered, A Journey. At age 45, my cognitive dissonance and many doubts about my theological beliefs caused me to leave my faculty and dean's position at Evangelical Christian Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and accept the position at a state university. I then began a theological study that initially lasted for 20 years. Hardcore ideological beliefs are really hard to change. Finally, at age 65, when I retired and moved to Colorado, I began writing about my spiritual journey to a more progressive religious belief. I wrote why I no longer accepted the Bible as the Word of God, and I raised the question, am I still a Christian? I no longer believed in the divinity of Jesus, but I accepted his teachings to care for the poor and the homeless and the sick and the marginalized. And I listed 11 ethical principles that guided my life, many based upon the teachings of Jesus. But since my 2 friends tell me after reading my writings I might be a humanist, I needed to explore what that meant. So my theological journey that I thought was over was not. Am I a humanist? I soon discovered humanism generally can be defined as an approach to life that is based on science, reason, democracy, and a compassion for others. The more I read about humanism, the more comfortable I felt with its description. And I thought, well, maybe, just maybe, I am a humanist. I noticed the term religious humanism was commonly found among Unitarian Universalism, and that opened up another investigation for me. What is Unitarian Universalism? For at the time, I did not know. My theological exploration, which I really love to do, was expanding. As Pete mentioned, Unitarians helped launch modern humanism in wishful thinking that humanism would become the religion of the future. The term religious humanism was used by UUs then and is really continued to this day. In their recent book, Humanist Voices in Unitarian Universalism, Gibbons and Murray write, quote, "This book is about religious humanism. We both identify as religious humanists, are both Unitarian Universalist ministers, and we both are members of the UU Humanist Association," end quote. The UU Humanist Association believes the term religious humanism expresses the relationship between humanism and Unitarian Universalism. Religious, in that it provides an opportunity to be a part of a beloved and accepting religious style community, including the sense of awe and wonder about the world and the mystery of life. I learned that Unitarian Universalism draws its traditions from 6 primary sources, with one of those sources, the 5th source, being, quote, humanistic teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, but yet it warns us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. So, am I a humanist, as my 2 friends suggested in 2014? After 2 years of further study, in 2016, when Donna and I attended BVUUF for the first time, and Reverend Lydia in her opening remarks said, "You are welcome here," I knew my theological journey brought me to perhaps where I've always been, a religious humanist, and now in the big UU tent. As David Leonard said and expressed it so well to me, quote, "Humanism is my religion, but BVUUF is my community." David, thank you for that statement.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your journey with us. And I'll say, along with many of the rest of us, I think we're so glad it led you to the fellowship. Each week, we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by giving half of our virtual collection plate to an organization that shares our values. Today, we share our plate with the Boulder County Sanctuary Coalition supporting Ingrid and Collada Latore. I want to invite Jean Nuttall to tell us more about her and how we can be of support.
For over 2 years, our fellowship has supported Ingrid and her family in sanctuary at the UU Church in Boulder. As volunteers, we have gotten to know and love Ingrid and her children. Bryant, who will be 12 on Tuesday, Anibal, who is 4, and baby Elizabeth. Volunteers take the boys places, help with laundry and groceries. Our fellowship is part of a new program through which local churches each provide groceries for 1 month. October is our month, which today's half plate will make possible. Despite the challenges Ingrid faces, she has an indomitable spirit. She created a program to warn others of the consequences of identity theft. She encourages people to participate in the census and to register and vote. Your support will provide the family with a month of good food and assure Ingrid that we remain her staunch supporters. I know she appreciates your generosity.
Thank you, Jean. During this time, we also invite you to answer this question in the chat. How does this fellowship nourish your heart and/or your head?
Oh, that's the sound of Tad Koryath. Of course, now he's married, so we should call him, I guess, Mr. Tad Koryath or something. I don't know. But the music was composed by Bill Douglas, a wonderful local composer. And now, Haley will tell us about her story. For the work of the Fellowship and the work of the Boulder Sanctuary Coalition, we offer our gratitude and the gifts we have collected. Thank you.
And now we sing. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Have any of you ever thought about the second half of the humanism source? The part that states humanism warns us against idolatries of the mind and spirit? Paul, a more careful reader than I, pointed out the peculiarity of this phrase to me, and it stuck. What do the mind and spirit make idols of? Or in what ways might we idolize them? Like Paul, I was raised an evangelical Christian. In my world, spirit was not a synonym for soul, but a living entity flowing like breath from God and infusing your life with love and power. In the circles where I grew up, everyone was trying to find, feel, and follow the Spirit. But often, this desire for a connection with God didn't lead towards an outpouring of love, but into an obsession with doing religion or spirituality right. To be right in the Christianity of my youth was to be not of this world, set apart as God's uniquely chosen. But I don't think that Christianity is unique in this more separatist path. Idolatry of the spirit or of the spiritual can come in many forms, but they all run the risk of disconnecting us from our human community. This idolatry prides us in our disconnection and guides us towards the kingdom of heaven and away from building the kingdom of heaven on earth. It comforts those who are oppressed, but does not give them the strength to stand up to their oppressors, asking for the oppressed to wait for spiritual, not material, freedom in the afterlife. Humanism has a long tradition of standing up to such idolatries, and so does our faith tradition. Our more spiritual side of the family, the Universalist, took part in the social gospel movement that did not wait for God to make things just in a future world, but did the work of social transformation in the here and now, as they believed Jesus would do. Our Black humanist Unitarian forefathers, like the Reverend Ethelred Brown I spoke of a few weeks ago, encouraged their parishioners to gather their own strength, intellect, and resources to fight injustice, rather than wait for God to ease their burdens. Our history is practically built on the admonishment to not idolize the things of the spirit. But what about the mind? Humanists and UUs love the mind. I knew I was personally drawn to UUism after reading the principles that honored the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. After coming from an arguably overly spiritual upbringing where my search for truth was often met with a response that faith is simple, which means don't ask questions, I am enamored by the mind, but it does have its limits. Humanism and UUism understand that science is evolving. What we understand to be true today may not be considered true tomorrow. We understand that our knowledge of the universe is limited in the face of its vastness, but our desire for certainty and knowledge is strong and can become an idolatry of the mind as soon as we decide that no evidence can change our belief. Science makes us aware of our limitations, but pride asks us to forget. Pride is never far from the idolatry of the mind, and I believe it plays an interesting cultural role in both humanism and UUism. 20th century Unitarians, some of whom helped found humanism, had the strong belief that their religion, based on reason, was the religion of the future, as one day all spiritual religions would be proved false and people would simply stop believing. But a religion of reason quickly becomes the religion of the white, educated, and middle class. And if it remains that way, it has a very limited future. What is reasonable to this subgroup of people is informed by their culture and often years of higher education. Who can be reasonable is often judged based on whether they fit in and agree with that group. To reason is to make the best sense that you can of all the information you've been given, but what if you haven't been given much? Are those who have less opportunity to gain knowledge suddenly out of the group? Do you have to use exactly this cerebral rather than an intuitional or experiential type of knowledge to join? The idolatry of the mind quickly leads to exclusivism as we forget the interconnection that's found in our spirits. So today, may we put the humble in humanism, remembering that excesses of both the spiritual and the intellectual can cause us to forget our common humanity. And perhaps it would do us well to remember the wise words of Socrates, "I know that I know nothing." Thanks.
I love the sun, I love the water, I love the birds that fly so high. They sing so sweetly, hope and sorrow, yearn to live, too soon they die. I love the part of human being that reaches out to touch the hands of those who need to feel their warmth and hear the words I understand. I love to watch a little child and see him grow and learn and thrive, run and play on sunny days and know the joy to be alive. And on the day I come to rest, I hope I will have peace of mind. Know that I have done my best and left a part of me behind. I love the sun, I love the water, I love the birds that fly so high. And now I invite us into our time of community connection, our time of sacred sharing. If you'd like to speak a joy or concern, please raise your hand using the button in the participants window, and Deborah will unmute you, or you may see a pop-up window asking you to unmute yourself. If you prefer, you can share your joy or concern in the chat window by sending a chat to everyone, and then Deborah will read out loud what you send. When you do share, whether by voice or by chat, please tell us your name and where you live and briefly let us know what is in your heart today. And I'll put a stone in our sacred waters on your behalf. I'm adding one more stone for any joy or concern still in the silent sanctuary of our hearts, knowing that we are bound together in this community and in the web of life. Beloveds, good friends, I want to quote William Murray from his book, Becoming More Fully Human, Religious Humanism as a Way of Life. We are sometimes suffering very much these days. Suffering can be a great teacher. It has the power to transform and redeem. To say that is neither to justify nor to detract from its searing pain, but it is to acknowledge that since to be human is to experience suffering, so also to be human is to be subject to the possibility of growth and transformation as a result of it. Suffering plays an important part in deepening our lives and broadening our sympathies. Humanists do not seek to suffer, but when pain and suffering comes, instead of responding with self-pity, it is important to do what we can to enable some good to come out of it. And now for my reflection. Calling humanism a source of UUism focuses on the value of science and reason. I wonder if those two words appear in the core writings of any other religion. UUism, citing humanism as a source, also works as a signal to certain outliers. Upholding science and reason with no mention of God or theism in our principles, atheists and agnostics might correctly deduce that UUism has a place for them, one of the few religions that does. Atheists have been marginalized throughout history, and even as our numbers grow well into the millions, atheists score low approval in US opinion polling right next to Muslims. Major media commentators have long assumed everyone is a believer and, quote, there are no atheists in foxholes. President George H.W. Bush said atheists couldn't be considered patriots. Atheists are marginalized as a group in part because, unlike racial minorities, not many are visible. They can, and many do, elect not to mention their atheism. They could lose jobs or friendships. Their children could lose playmates. And in some countries, atheists are jailed or even killed. While theists might easily bring up God in normal conversation, there aren't many opportunities to say, just thought I'd mention I'm an atheist. Just doesn't come up. From childhood, we all get exposed to a presumed shared theism. Songs like God Bless America, Under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, In God We Trust, On All Our Money, God in the Boy Scout oath mirroring their exclusion of atheists, inaugurations always using a Judeo-Christian Bible, athletes and award winners thanking the Lord or Jesus for their victories, etc. With all the God input and few atheist voices heard in public, going against the grain has its stresses. One way non-believers cope is to find like-minded people. This seems especially true of those who, like me, have strongly theistic close relatives. My need for support was a big part of what propelled me into humanist and atheist organizations, and many of the folks I'd meet had similar stories. The closer the relative, it seemed, the greater the commitment to the non-believer group. What about these groups? Well, considering recent US polls indicating 13 million atheists and 16 million agnostics and many more millions unchurched, one might wonder how many million people are in these groups. Well, the total is in the low 100,000s, similar to the number of UUs in the US. And many of those people are the very same people. So, though about 1 in 10 Americans are atheists or agnostics, of those people, only 1 in 200 is in an atheist or humanist organization. Now, what do these organizations actually do? Well, along with discussions and outreaching for more members, some challenge the excessive powers of religion, opposing organized school prayer, churches' enormous tax-free wealth, religious installations on public property, or the Boy Scouts' exclusion of atheists is not a way to be popular. Those are long, bruising fights, such as Margaret Downey waged for years with the Boy Scouts, getting Steven Spielberg to quit their board and ultimately depriving the Scouts of their privileged status as a public organization due to its discriminatory policies. Many people are glad to know of these efforts, but atheists and atheist groups are often thought to be too negative. Where's the positive stuff? What are they for? It's a good point, and it's why so many atheists and agnostics identify with humanism and with UUism, whose positive values overlap closely with each other. Are we for reason and science? Yes. Do we love compassion? Absolutely. Are democracy, the arts, and the environment fundamental and worthy of our support and involvement? Certainly. For or against peace? For. Justice? Same. Do we respect wisdom from a wide variety of traditions? Sure. If it's good, why not take it in? Sometimes a focus on science and reason can blur into a style that's, shall we say, pretty dry. Matters that can be analyzed rationally are readily discussed, and inexact matters of the heart may be put aside. This may remind us of older educated white males, as Haley spoke of, which tends to fit what I've seen in humanist organizations, and hey, I'm one. Contemporary Black humanists, such as Dr. Anthony Pinn, have advocated for humanism to connect more with matters of the heart and not just the intellectual side of life, as a way of broadening its appeal these days. It's an interesting contrast, though. In Harlem, in the 1920s and 30s, part of the appeal of Ethelred Brown's predominantly Black Unitarian congregation, part of the appeal was that Unitarian theology engaged more of the intellect than traditional Black Baptist religious styles. Reverend Lewis McGee was a humanist and a Unitarian minister who started the predominantly Black Free Religious Fellowship in Chicago in 1948. He said, "We believe in the creative imagination as a power in promoting the good life." For him and other Black humanists of that time, creative imagination was not just an abstract theoretical concept. It was about imagining how to harness human potential to resist white oppression. They didn't see suffering as an opportunity for redemption or part of God's plan. They blamed white racism on humans. Instead of participating in what they termed a collective God delusion, they thought people should quit shirking the task of righting the wrongs. The creative imagination of that period yielded new tactics and new energy that propelled change in the 50s and 60s and onward. Another Black minister, a Unitarian Universalist minister of today, Reverend Leah Ongiri, says, "The task of social progress is ours and ours alone, since humans and not God possess the agency to make change happen." That is a common theme in humanism. No pie in the sky. Work for it here on earth in your one life. The focus on the head or the heart varies among humanist groups as it does among UUs. And though both have in the past leaned toward the intellectual, lately we see a growing openness to a variety of styles. As Paul mentioned, the term religious humanism is understood as humanism with the style of religion, such as inspiring words, songs, rituals, surroundings, etc. The AHA certifies humanist celebrants who can perform weddings and other functions. But some humanists shun ritual and ceremony and things like hugging and singing. Folks like that are sometimes referred to as secular humanists. Now, I'm sorry for a bit of semantics here, just a bit, but it's about that term secular humanism. By definition, all humanism is secular, that is, not involved with the supernatural, not involved, in other words, with things that that is beings or places that don't exist in nature. Secular is redundant with humanism, but maybe it helps to clarify that humanism is secular. As Paul said, there's another meaning. Secular humanist becomes a Christian right term for those who would bring down Christianity. Meanwhile, others use secular humanism to reference the more outwardly dry styles of humanism as opposed to religious humanism. So there's these different meanings for the term secular humanism. And for a bit more confusion, sometimes people use the word humanistic when they really are trying to say humane or humanitarian with no connection to or awareness of the philosophy called humanism. Despite humanism's efforts to be noticed, including 3 manifestos starting in 1933. In my own spiritual journey, early on, I assumed I would fit best in a purely humanist atheist context. Oops, lost my place. But I really prefer BVUUF. The messages, the music, the outreaching fellowship and working together on social action and many projects makes us a real community. Humanists are great, but I don't want to isolate myself with just them. I like that we are all here on a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The values we hold high are at the core of my hope for world peace. If we can be a nourishing community with compassion, informed by science and reason, we'll have found a good place to make our home. A little scrolling here to get to my place on screen. All right, it's sing-along time, folks. You haven't sung yet, and I'm way out here in Niwot, but if you sing loud enough, maybe I'll hear you. And we're going to listen to my recording of a song we all love so much called This Little Light of Mine. Sing along. It's a good song for now and every day. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Shine my light around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine my light around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine my light around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. If someone tries to pick a fight, I'm gonna let it shine. Someone tries to pick a fight, I'm gonna let it shine. Someone tries to pick a fight, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Even if I'm not feeling good, I'm gonna let it shine. Even if I'm not feeling good, I'm gonna let right, I'm unmuted, and thanks for singing along. I looked through the gallery, and quite a few of you were singing along, and others were listening. I'm glad to have you either way. Remember, we're going to have the opportunity for a chat later. You can talk to me and Haley and Paul in just a few minutes after the service is over. As we conclude today's service, I invite you to say with me our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, or the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Friends, every September after Labor Day weekend is, for many of us, the start of a season of activity, the school year, or other new beginnings. Yet, here we are still with a feeling of one hand tied behind our back and our feet mired in mud. It's hard for almost everyone, yet this is the time to summon a new burst of energy. There is so much to be grateful for and so much potential of new beginnings. Let's find that energy and that potential while being sure, as Ilya and his son did, being sure to spend some time enjoying this beautiful season here on the wonderful planet Earth. Thank you.